right, it's Tuesday, 8:30. This is the Legislative and Human Resources Committee. If you're here for that, you're in the right spot. It's also 2/2/2 Tuesday, so 2/22/22. So if you're a mathy person, it's palindrome week too. Anyway, that's enough about me, but the first item on the agenda is public comment. Is there anyone from the public who'd like to make a comment? All right, seeing none, our next item is approval of the minutes. If you all have had a chance to review the minutes, any questions or comments, would someone like to make a motion to approve the minutes?
Support.
Moved and supported. All right. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those
Nay.
opposed, same sign.
Got back from the UP.
All right, motion passes. Make sure that your mics are on today. It's so everybody can hear, and those of us streaming online can hear us as well. It's important to have that participation and able to listen and hear what we've got going on. Today, I'd like to welcome Becky Beckler from PAA. She's here to give us a legislative update. There's quite a lot that's been going on, but there's also some stuff that's been a little bit stagnant, but you've got all the news for us. So thanks for joining us, Becky.
Thank you very much. The governor's budget recommendation. Okay, is this better? All right, sorry about that. Okay, let me start again then. With the governor's budget recommendations now released, both the House and the Senate Appropriations Committees will now begin to unpack each individual subcommittee and go over it line by line, take testimony, and then come up with their own recommendations. It's a pretty robust budget. It's $74 billion, which is 6% higher than the current year budget. There's a significant amount of one-time spending in this budget, and the governor also is recommending within her budget proposal 3 supplementals that I'll quickly go over. But for counties, there's some good news in these appropriation recommendations. For revenue sharing, the governor has proposed a 10% increase, which is 5% would go into the base and 5% would be a one-time funding. She's also recommending $578 million in new funding for roads, bridges, airports, rail, and of that, about $94 million would specifically go to local roads. There's a $500 million water infrastructure improvement, and within that, there's some venue or recommendations for lead improvements, and I know that's a priority for the county, so we're looking at that close. $325 million for a new psychiatric hospital. $175 million for judicial assignment management and trial court funding, $148 million for Indigent Defense Commission funding, and $4.2 for the County Veteran Services Fund, as well as $15 million for jail and other increases that were recommended by the governor, almost 9% for community colleges and 10% for higher education. The 15 universities, though, in order to qualify, would have to agree to limit their tuition increases below 5%, and they'd also need to reach agreement with at least 3 community college as far as reverse transfer agreements in order to qualify for that increase. K through 12 also did pretty well, almost $20 billion through increases and a supplemental that the governor's requesting. So there's quite a bit of money dedicated toward K through 12 in the With regard to the supplementals, as you know, the legislature just adopted one, and the governor signed it last week. It was referred to in Lansing as a COVID supplemental because so much was directly dedicated towards COVID. The biggest expense was $300 million towards retention of nurses and healthcare workers in hospitals and nursing homes and adult foster care. There's also money, about $50 million, towards long-term care settings, trying to make improvements within that, as well as attempting to come up with more money to help with the remedies and for COVID expenses. So that was a pretty robust, it was $1.2 billion total. It had started out in the negotiations at a $2 billion, and they had to pare that back. So with that, there's still $4.7 billion in federal funds that the state government needs to appropriate about that. Within the leadership, they're talking about the next supplemental being on infrastructure. We're not quite certain how broad the infrastructure supplemental will be. The conversations just started in earnest, I think, last week. I can't give you a sense of timing because, as you know, once I give you a sense of timing, it never works out. But they do want to continue with these supplementals as they are going through the budget as well. So this could get a pretty robust budget process. when the governor recommended a budget, her first supplemental was really pretty much what the COVID supplemental was that she just signed last week. The second one is pretty much dedicated towards food assistance. I think she wants to dedicate about $1 billion toward food assistance, $500 million into economic incentive. If you recall, at the end of the year, the legislature approved $1 billion economic incentive program. She would like to recommend adding $500 million in addition to that, as well as $500 million in hero pay. And again, those are incentives to keep our frontline workers engaged in employment. And then she's also recommending an education supplemental, as I referenced, $1.6 billion for retention bonuses and $500 million to recruit new teachers. So that's the governor's recommendation. I think she's attempting to keep the eye on the ball with the legislature and keep them on point about spending ARPA funds, since we have so much money still available. And that's on top of the state funds that are still robust as well. So we'll continue to watch that. Now, last week, the Senate Republicans also passed a pretty robust tax decrease. They took our 4.2 income tax and 6% corporate tax and moved it down to 3.9%. That's a $2.5 billion hit to our budget. It's something that the governor has indicated that she doesn't believe is sustainable, simply because with the ARPA funds, you cannot use that for tax decreases. So you can't use that, and plus that's one-time spending. So I think the governor's looking for some alternatives. If you recall, in her State of the State, she had recommended earned income tax credit and then getting rid of the pension tax. If you recall, under then Governor Snyder, he had, 2011, he had a pension tax. She has recommended repealing that as well. So I say that because I believe that there's going to be a conversation on tax decreases in the next several months as well as part of the budget process. I can't tell you what that end will look like, but clearly the governor's interested in some type of tax decrease, as well as the Senate and House Republicans. So I think that conversation is yet to come. So that's really what has been happening in the legislature over the last 2 or 3 weeks. I would be happy to answer any questions that anyone might have.
All right. Do we have any questions? Yes.
Chair, when you say that there's money set aside for judicial management, can you speak exactly what that is, what the goal is for that?
So I don't have details. Some of it does go to trial court funding, is something that we've been watching, but I will get the individual budget to you that starts to unpack that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah, Commissioner Hennessy.
There's quite a list that you've given us, and we have our own proposal for our legislative priorities. So how do we at this point begin to coordinate so that the advocacy, so that there's actual action on some of these that are priorities for us? I guess it seems a little bit overwhelming in terms of the various directions. So how do we coordinate the advocacy and for action?
Yes, thank you very much. We have started in November meeting with not only our delegation, but key appropriations members through talking about the county priorities, and we have continued out through January and February, and I think we continue to have meetings not only with our delegation, but with key appropriation members, talking about our priorities, and we'll continue to do that both on a one-on-one basis as well as some informal group settings. So we are directly lobbying each and every delegation member on our priorities.
Any other questions or comments? I think I've been part of several of those meetings with our legislators, and they've been really important to relay, what we're trying to accomplish here in Kent County and how, we could best use and coordinate the ARPA funds is, one of the key things. And we want to do something that's sustainable and that's going to be building on, our future here in Kent County. So by collaborating with our, state legislators, our federal legislators, using the best funds that are available is what we're really trying to accomplish. But those meetings have been important. Al has been involved in several of them, Stan and I, other members. Yeah. Do you have any other questions?
I do, thank you. One of the priorities we're going to talk about is going to be the statewide sanitary code, which might be apart from the other federal money coming in. And I'm curious as to, how, if you think there'll ever be any movement. This is one that we've wanted for a long time, that's been advocated and never goes anywhere.
Yes, you are correct about that. We have advocated that for quite some time. The initial conversations, and also we've been talking with Senator Stamas directly about that, who chairs the Senate Appropriations Committee. I guess it's still unknown. We need to have more conversations with him. That was in December, the last conversation we had with him, but we'll continue to work on that. It is a priority. I know it's also a priority for the Michigan Association of Counties. Continue to see if we can get that accomplished this year.
Any other questions from commissioners? All right, seeing none, thanks for the update, and we look forward to hearing updates periodically as information is available. So, thank you. All right, so our next item on the agenda is discussion on the formal legislative program. And, you know, in the past, I think things have been done slightly differently on the LHR committee here. And I think it's important for some of these items to be highlighted here. And just for your information before we head into the work session on Thursday, I think Thursday is a good time for our, like, a more thorough discussion and evaluation of these priorities. But if there's something here, looking through these, that you think has been overlooked, I'd like to, you know, hear from you. If there's questions that you have on these items, we'll do our best to kind of sort through that. But like I said, the more, you know, thorough discussion I think would be best set aside for Thursday with our legislative priorities work session with our colleagues who serve on the Finance Committee too. So with that, Al, did you have some more that you wanted to add to this?
No, I think, well, yes, I do. Maybe 3 changes. So I think this is basically the ones that you worked on last year with just a few changes to them. And so the bulk of it, I think a good deal of time was spent last year in developing these. I would say that, you know, leadership has put a high priority on getting the kind of the mental health work that's been, that they've been working on, we've been working on for about, well, at least 3 years now. But the Mental Health Crisis Center, that's something that comes up when we have our discussions. Also, you know, I think, you know, lead and PFAS, you know, we have a number of places where we'd like to remediate that. I think every conversation that's come up as well. We do have the Fallsburg Dam. I think some of our knowledge has changed a little bit as far as the dam goes, and maybe some, there's, I think, a potential now for some, a company to want to repair one of the generators and actually start generating electricity with it again. So I think that there's certain ones that if we only have a half hour to talk to a legislator, we've been hitting, and others like the sanitary code. I mean, that's an important thing. Obviously, that will, and there's some things I think we can do with ARPA money in that area, but I think that a lot of what we do in that area will be dictated by a new code. And it seemed like we came close, and then it disappeared, and so I think there's probably 4 or 5 things that we typically hit in a lot of the funding discussions, and then other things we need to keep working on. For example, another one is we'd really love to see the courts digitize all of their records, and that would be records also in the sheriff's office, the prosecutor's office, the court records division. It's amazing the efficiencies that can be gained when we can do that. And so, for example, there's $175 million in the governor's budget. We thought maybe it would go towards digitization of records and maybe also for the case management upgrade. It looks like it's all targeted for the case management system upgrade. So PAA will assist us in basically advocating for funding to be used for that digitization process, which could be $8 million for Kent County. So that's kind of been the focus, I would say. Mental health, the court records, PFAS, lead, and then also Fallsburg Dam, because we think with kind of redefining the status of that, it makes it much more attractive for funding the dam project. And then obviously parks, we had put in that huge ask to the EDA for Build Back Better, and so that's usually also part of every conversation. Is the great thing about that EDA process is we ended up with a really good framework and plan, and so now it's a matter of trying to get as much as we can from different sources to implement that. It's a real, you know, as you know, a very exciting vision with everything that's happening or will be happening on the river in Grand Rapids, tied to everything that's happening between here and Lake Michigan, all the way to Lowell. We think that's going to be ultimately a system like none other in the country. And so that's another thing we constantly advocate for as well.
At the federal level, Commissioner Skaggs and I and Al and Lori and Jenny were all at the National Association of Counties legislative conference last week, and we were able to meet with Representative Molnar's office and also Representative Meyer's office. And I think the conversations of how the process is working is going to be different than what it has been in the past. It's more reaching the department level, so having our congressmen connect with the departments, having our senators, connect with the departments on our behalf to help orchestrate receiving, funding for various things. And the whole budget is kind of a mess right now, to be honest, so at the federal level. So working through this is definitely a heavy lift, but we rely on our lobbyist in DC, Steve Carey, who I'm sure you've all have heard from before, so he's a good advocate for the county. But I think it's important to align some of these projects too with various legislators who are, on the correct committees to help us out with this and to continue those conversations. But I'd like to hear from you all if you have questions on these items or, see something that we may have missed. So, Commissioner Kallman.
Thank you, Chair. Two things. One, I'm unfortunately going to miss the work session because I'm going to be out of town with my family here for a few days. Will the work session be on YouTube later that I can catch up on what was discussed?
Yeah, we can do that.
Awesome. And then my second question is, previously we've also had and this is maybe at the tail end of the process, but like a color-coded handout version. Do we still plan to do that? I found that, useful for myself and also for showing others.
Yes, we are going to do that. This right here, what is in front of you, is just a really working draft so that we can make any, content changes, and then we'll put it into that more formal looking that you see. Red is funding, green is policy. Yes, so you will have that
Awesome.
when
That's
it
great.
comes back to you to vote on.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep, so we'll have the work session, it'll come back to legislative, and then we'll discuss it and vote on it, and it will go out. Is it voted on by the full board?
Yes.
Yes, so at some point it will be voted on by the full board too, so. And then we'll get the booklet. Commissioner LeGrand and then Commissioner Skaggs.
Can you speak to the digitization of court records? Are we discussing only past records that will be going digital, or is it an ongoing?
It's ongoing, right, so we would go back a certain ways, but also the main purpose also is to move forward. Ultimately, and we did this in Ottawa County years ago, but the benefit is you can have everyone who should have access, can have access to a real-time file and be working on it, as opposed to having to catch files up with paper all the time. And we actually did time studies that showed that when a file was lost, it took 7.5 hours of staff time to replace a lost file. And I just remember a visual we did at the end of a big truck full of file folders, and it's just, it's so efficient as far as staff savings, making sure that files are accurate and up to date and never lost. It's could be a huge improvement to how our business workflow.
What does the $8 million pay for exactly? Is that establishing the systems at a one-time?
Well, it's purchasing the system, and then it's actually paying to have all the records digitized, because we wouldn't be staffed to be able, it would take us a long, long time to be able to get caught up. I mean, we'll get everyone trained and we'll be able to handle digitization going forward with staff. And I can't recall what we may have added as far as staffing goes. So that's really just to, and that I think also improves some improvement to the case management system. So I think it's maybe 6.5 just for the records and another $1.5 million for case management. And then, and so going forward, you would have some kind of software maintenance fee, and we would have maybe some staffing, and then, but really going forward, we would take care of our own records as they come in. And with electronic case file management, you can see a day when really there's no paper, or very, very little paper, because it's all coming in electronically. The files are being built and maintained electronically. And I remember after we went through all this in Ottawa, we were part of an effort where the state allowed electronic signatures in a lot of cases for the first time in the court system, because initially it was frustrating to have everything digitized and then to have to print something out for a judge to sign. Well, a lot of that can be signed electronically now, so.
Thank you, thanks, great.
All right, Commissioner Skaggs.
Thank you, Chair. Just for the work session, if we could, because I can't seem to find it on my computer, I'm sure it's in an email, but if we could just get maybe the 2021 priorities, you know, and ideally if we could get what the changes are between 2021 and the proposed 2022, that would be useful, I think.
I can walk you through it really quick if you want right now there to see what the changes are.
Yeah, go ahead if you want to run through that.
I'll just highlight the ones that have changed. The first one was about the ARPA funds. As you remember, last year, it was more, we needed the funding to continue the recovery, and now this one just slightly changed to say we need direct and flexible funding so that we can address those priorities. So that more goes to what Commissioner Brevi talked about, is working at that department level with the rulemaking to make sure our programs will fit into those state programs. So that was the kind of just a small tweak to the ARPA ones. Under the fiscal sustainability for local units of government, the one that we added was bullet 2, and this aligns with the Michigan Association of Counties. It's the elimination of the county incentive program and shift that funding that is in that program to just the general revenue sharing account. And for those of you that don't know, this was a plan that was put under Governor Snyder's administration, and I'm probably going to oversimplify this by saying that basically a pool of money was set aside for those that received revenue sharing, and you had to demonstrate collaboration and partnership. And then every year you have to submit a report to the state showing what you've done, and we do that. I don't think anybody looks at that report, evaluates the report, et cetera. So we're just saying push it all into the general revenue funding account and take away that burden for our fiscal team to file that report. And Al, I don't know if you have more about that bullet. Under the environmental contamination challenges, the one that we did add was a statewide sanitary code. That one is completely new. And if you do have questions, Brendan Earl from the Health Department is here and probably will be here Thursday to answer any questions as well. But that priority is completely new as well. Under preserve behavioral health funding, this was a small change. Last year, we were just advocating that the funding be placed in the budget for that increase. Now we're asking that it be a permanent wage increase for those direct care workers so that we don't have to keep going back every year saying put in that higher rate. So that was just a small tweak. It's just to keep it consistent. Under the identify the stable funding for county courts, this one was a small change as we continue to talk about the need for a more permanent funding source for our courts. It is becoming more grave, as you'll see under the Kavanaugh case. We have until October 1st, 2022 for them to address how they're going to fund county courts. If that sunset is not extended from the court case, we're going to face a real financial crisis. So the legislature either needs to extend the sunset or come up with a more permanent funding for our trial courts. So that's just a small tweak that we made under the county courts funding, as that sunset legislation is upon us.
Is that Kavanaugh or Cunningham?
Cunningham, did I say
Cunningham
Kavanaugh?
case.
Sorry, Cunningham.
Yep, yeah.
Thirsty, kind of, yes, Cunningham case, sorry. The other big change is the, under the continuation of the foster care program. This relates to WMPC. Currently, WMPC has boilerplate language in the Appropriation Act to allow them to operate as a pilot program and continue funding. That sunset expires October 1, 2022. If we do not get an extension on that boilerplate, then WMPC will not be able to continue operations on their funding and programming. So that's a new one for WMPC. And the other big one that we added was to create a reliable funding source for our secondary road patrol. You can see that that is an issue that we work with the sheriff on every year. It's trying to get sustainability for that fund so it doesn't come at the end of the year when we don't know when the money's coming, how much money is coming, et cetera. So that one is a new one that we're working with the sheriff's office and the Michigan Sheriff's Association to get that a long-term solution for that. And then the federal legislative priorities, the big one that we added, and I will let Commissioner Breivy answer any questions on this, was assisting the airport in getting the air traffic control tower relocation new, et cetera. So that's a priority that we'll be working closely with the airport to try to get that over the hump and get that new tower out there so that expansion can, occur throughout the airport. So that, under the federal priorities, that's the biggest change. So those, I ran through those, but yes, I do have a spreadsheet that shows which is new, and I can get that to you before Wednesday, or Thursday.
Certain size, okay.
Yeah, Commissioner Hennessy.
Thank you for your itemizing the changes that have been made. I really appreciate the way in which this has, our legislative priorities have continued to evolve and to be prioritized. And I do appreciate too that the direct care workers is included here. I did wonder if the statement, for mental illness or developmental disabilities, if it's inclusive enough of all the direct care workers that there are, for example, our senior citizen in-home care workers. So I just wondered if the inclusiveness of that statement, if it could be broadened. And not to quibble, but I was on the lead task force. We've all really supported the lead, and I just wondered if our statement was completely forceful enough and really direct enough to really focus the attention on how important this is to us, because it really is important to all of us. And I do appreciate that we've got the sanitary code added this year.
So I will say with the lead, the reason that we drafted these priorities is we tried to make them broad enough that would give the staff flexibility to kind of work. For example, there is an entire lead package that is going through the legislature right now, and that, ebb and flows as amendments get added and it gets through committee. So we tried to draft these broad enough so that they understand it, but please know that there's a backup behind that the staff is working with legislators saying, we can support this bill, we can't support this, here's our concern, et cetera. So I don't want this to think that this is not the only time the legislators are hearing from us on this, because that lead, we know, is a big priority. We have it both as a policy, and then we also have it in our ARPA funding priorities as well to try to address that lead.
Commissioner McLeod.
Thank you, Chair. So this, I like the way this is laid out, and, the changes that were made seem really impactful. I did have a question about the West Michigan Partnership for Children, and maybe this is a question maybe more for Al. Just wondering what the backup plan is if this is not extended. What happens to the way our children are, placed in the foster system, and how that process will work? Who would be responsible for that? Would that fall to the county directly, or how would that be managed?
It's my understanding that if the funding goes away, it would just go back to the state management and then when they contract out with the individual foster care and adoption agencies. So the overall management would go back to DHS for that.
Commissioner Ponstein.
Thank you, Chair Breivy. Al, I know in the years past we have, but do we still take in state prisoners to house in our jail? And are we getting reimbursed fully for that when that happens?
I think we should have the sheriff answer that question since she's here.
I don't want to get her wound up.
My coat off today. I didn't think there'd be any way to come up here. In some contexts, we do. We don't do it as a housing strategy, but if they were here for court, we would house a state prisoner. If they're picked up on a parole violation, we'd house them for a period of time so they can get transferred to DOC. We also house them after they've been sentenced, so they're actually a ward of DOC, but they haven't yet been transported to DOC. In some contexts, we can charge, we never get paid enough, we never get paid as much as it costs us to house them, so we try to limit that time as much as possible.
All right, any further questions regarding the legislative priorities? Commissioner Kallman.
Just throw this out as an idea since I won't be able to be there Thursday to throw it out. And I'm not even sure if there's something to do about this, but it strikes me that with state budgets, our budgets, like there's money flowing around like never before, right? Like there's just so much money. And yet there's also a bunch of existing programs, and things that have just been humming along for decades that have baked in kind of this 2%, 3%, cost inflation, assumption, and staring down, 6, 7, 8%. That's a pretty big gap. And I don't know if there's anything that needs or can be lobbied for in that regard, but it seems like we might be setting ourselves up for challenges in some long-standing areas because of those dynamics.
Yeah, that's a good point to make. I mean, with inflation dramatically increasing, where are we at with our current programs that have been slightly increasing year after year? That's definitely something to consider. So we can talk more about that down the road. Any other questions or comments? I just have a comment about the airport. The airport works with a lobbyist as well at the federal level. But we really feel like this is a project that's important for not only Kent County, but our region as a whole, just with the traffic that the airport brings in. And so I think it's important for the county to show an interest in it too, because, it is located here in Kent County. It is, a source where there's a lot of revenue that gets generated through the airport. And this airport tower, it's like the oldest tower in the country for an airport of our category and size. So it's necessary to have that improved, not only because it's old, and we've been trying to do this for 30 years. So it's a project that is super important, but it's kind of a catalyst into the overall improvement of the airport. That needs to be relocated so other improvements can be made to continue the expansion and being able to service the customers that come through the airport. So it's definitely a key thing. There's other priorities that the airport has, and they're working with their own lobbyist on that. But it's just important for the county to be a partner in this priority. So that's one of the reasons why you see the airport on there. Did you have something to add?
Yeah, one other thing. I just wanted to mention, we didn't talk about broadband. That'll be another major priority. And I just had to relay a funny story. So I went to Bureaucrat morning, so they had a big room with tables from representatives from all the agencies, and whether it's money or regulation, just wanted a face and a name to communicate with. And so I walked up to a table where there were two people with the grant programs for broadband. I can't remember the agency. It wasn't US DOT, though. And there was a commissioner from Illinois on the left talking animatedly. And so I walked to the person on the right and said, "Hi, Al Vanderberg, Kent County, Michigan administrator." And they all turned and looked at me like they saw a ghost. Because she was griping about how bad broadband is in Kent County, Michigan, because she's descended from a Byron farmer and owns the last 20 acres with a house on it and can't get broadband without paying a lot of money. And so when I literally apparated when she was griping about Kent County, they freaked. But anyways, we had a nice talk, and so.
There's definitely good connections made there, but broadband was something that we talked about significantly at the conference. And, I think there's going to be some movement on that, but what I understand is the FCC is going to be doing some mapping, but we don't really know how long and when that will take. So the county is also doing, going to be participating in some mapping, which is coming out of the broadband committee. Did you have something else you want to add?
I just wanted to say that this year, as Commissioner Brady said, it's a little different, and we almost have two sets of priorities going. So we have, what you have in front of you is like the policy ones, and then when we know when a budget supplemental is coming up, for example, we know when it's coming up for behavioral health, we put a priority up for that too. So we do have another set of kind of the funding priorities, so that's why you don't see like the dam, you don't see broadband on this that's in front of you, but we do have a second set that we're talking specifically about ARPA fundings when those supplementals go through. And we're happy to share that with you, but just know that is a working document, and as supplementals come forward and we think programs fit, we add it and talk to legislators about it.
There's a lot of conversations going on, and staff has
Yes.
been doing a great job facilitating that. Are there questions or comments regarding the priorities at all? Yeah, Commissioner Hennessy.
I appreciate this. One of the things that we don't have in here in any way, and I know that they're doing their own advocacy, and since we own the property, is there anything for the zoo? Because they've been doing a lot to improve their stormwater system and other, other environmental things. Is there any way in which we can prioritize some of these land and soil and water improvements for the zoo? As well as their amphitheater. I mean, not the amphitheater, but their aquarium. Misspoke myself there. Aquarium.
Yeah, Peter and I do meet monthly, and they do plan to make an ask for ARPA funds.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll support them in that.
Well, that's, I think, more of the ARPA decision-making, yes, and this is more of the overall policy piece. But I think that they can make the case that some of their investment will be transformational. And that's, I think, one of the major bars we'll want to see is how does the investment play out in the future with increased attendance, increased revenue, that kind of thing. So,
A lot of it's increased environmental.
right. In their case, they can make a case even that a significant expansion of the parking lot will bring a lot more people to attend and increase revenue and participation. And so, yeah, I think that they will be making an ask, and I think that they'll compete well.
Thank you.
And you guys make that final decision. So the board will make those final allocation decisions, so.
You mean our board here or the zoo board?
No, I mean, I'm sorry, spending the ARPA money, the county, the 117 million that you haven't allocated yet for ARPA.
May qualify, as some of these other supplementals come forward and we have a little bit more clarity. We are always sharing information with them to say you may qualify for this too. So we are working in concert with all of our our authorities too to make sure that they see it, apply for those fundings, opportunities.
I'm glad you said that, because part of the interesting life we have right now is there's so much out there, we really don't know where everything is. And even with the federal transportation money, there's some asks that I know we'll get for ARPA money that could be covered with transportation money, but they're not anticipating that the transportation details will be done. Is it even this year? It might be late this year, but
Yeah, so I think what we learned at NACO, or confirmed what we knew, is that last year, U.S. Congress passed the policy around the federal infrastructure bill. What they did not do is attach money to that. So none of the departments can do anything, when I say the federal departments can administer any of these programs until the money gets attached. There is hope that they will get a budget passed by March 11th, and that funding will be attached then, and then the departments can start rolling out the different parts of it. But until money gets allocated, we're in a holding pattern right now on the federal infrastructure bill, which is a domino because broadband's a good example. There's funding in there for states and there's funding in there for locals, but they got to get it appropriated and they have to get it to the states and they have to get it to us. So we're kind of in a holding pattern until Congress appropriates the money.
And part of our goal with the money isn't to figure out, okay, how do we spend 127 million, as much as how do we spend 250 million or 300? How can we build partnerships such that has a much bigger splash today and in the future? So,
Yeah, I really think it's how do we maximize our best use of the funding, you know, being responsible with, I mean, these are tax dollars, being responsible with these tax dollars and making sure what we're doing is sustainable in the long run. So I think the domino effect is a very good description of this. We're waiting, you know, at the federal level, and the state is waiting for the feds, and we're waiting for the feds and the state, and everything will go into place soon, hopefully. But any other questions about these priorities? Commissioner Ponstein.
So back to the airport and their tower. The federal government's been collecting fees for decades and have funds to pay for things like this, because it is a safety issue, not just for Kent County, but other places. Does anyone know where that stands, or what the pot of money is by the feds, and why it's never released? I know Roger Morgan complained about that a lot, of all the money that's there, but it's never released.
So, Commissioner,
I don't know if I have a clear answer. Maybe you have a better answer on that, but I do think, you know, there is a desire to do this. I just think somebody needs to sign off on it, basically. I understand that there was a new department created within the FAA to work on these infrastructure dollars. So it's something within that department that needs to get allocated so the county can, or the airport can get a tower. And it's just jumping through hoops is what it really is.
yeah, and as you can imagine, at least the way Tori described it to me is that there's a limited pool of money. And what they do when the FAA goes through that process of determining projects, we just have to get on that upper tier so that we get funded in that and not get pushed to another year. So really our ask is that we remain eligible and a top priority so that it does get funded. So there is money there. I think it is getting allocated. It's just not getting allocated to Kent County. So that's really what we're trying to push, is that as we are the second, I think the second oldest tower out of in the world, so that we can get up there and get that funding for that.
Michigan having 2 U.S. senators, where do they stand on that? Because we go back to the whole thing as East versus West.
I think Senator Peters has been pretty helpful, actually, in this. He's aware of the situation, and he's been an advocate for it. So I think, you know, that's an important relationship to have. Our, you know, Congressman Peter Meyer, he's very supportive of it and willing to help us, you know, where he's able to. So I think we have the right people behind us, but I also think it's a matter of keeping Kent County and the Ford Airport kind of at the top of the list, and continuing to advocate for that is really important, because we've gone through the process with the FAA as far as like the tower placement and the tower design. That was actually all done virtually during the COVID shutdown, and we were able to map it, and it was really neat how it was all done. So a lot of the work has been done, and I would say this project is pretty close to being shovel ready. So we just need the green light to go forward. Does that help answer your question a little bit?
Well, the printing presses are running every second of every day, so I don't think money's the problem.
I think it's,
Printing it, what's the holdup?
I think it has to deal, like, you know, within the FAA, getting the sign off on it, really, you know, and getting the okay to move forward. So, any other questions or comments on this one? All right, we made some really good use of our time this morning. I look forward to seeing you at the work session on Thursday. So I will, is there any Commissioner miscellaneous before we close this out? All right, seeing none, I'll adjourn the meeting. Our next meeting will be March 8th in this room at 8:30 a.m. Thank you guys, have a good Tuesday.